Hello curious people, I am Associate Professor Sanjoy Paul, a supply chain expert in risk, disruption and resilience. I am here to answer your questions. This is Business Curious. Let's get started. Why are petrol prices going up and how does that affect everything else? It's all about supply and demand. If supply goes down or there is a shortage in supply, prices go up. If there is any spike in demand, prices go up. But in this specific case, we have seen fuel shortages, and on the other hand, we have seen excessive demand through panic buying. And this double pressure create tension in the system and end up having higher prices. The impacts flow through in other branches of our supply chain. For example, our transportation, our truck delivery systems rely on oils heavily. Our farmers, they rely on fuels heavily for their equipment to run their operations. Our emergency services, our waste collectors, everything, they rely on oils. The impacts will not be limited to only on fuel shortages or on petrol pumps. It will flow through all branches of our supply chain and potentially end up having impacts on yourself. How do fuel prices affect food production, not just transport? So our farmers rely on fertilizers that comes from petroleum products. So that's why there is a big connection between availability of fuels and fertilizers. If there is a shortage in fertilizers, farmers will scale back and that can reduce our production. And if there are not enough production of food products, it will end up having shortages and stock out at the retail stores. Sometimes there is a chronic shortage of food supply, even you cannot buy with money. Why do some grocery items go up in price more than others? So if you want to understand the consequences on different food items, you need to understand their characteristics. So if you see our farmer, they are planning for our winter season now. So if our fertilizers and fuel supplies are impacted, their production and planning for their production in winter season, even in the subsequent seasons, will be impacted. But for some other items, we could see that processed items that can be processed before or now to sell it for later. And that products will be less hit. We rely on imported foods as well. So you may not see the price go up immediately, but when that consequences of shortages will become visible, maybe we'll see the price of those imported price will go up. But I would suspect that local produce will hit most because of the dependency on fuels and fertilizers. Do supermarkets control prices or are they dealing with the rising costs too? So that's a good one. I would say whatever we have seen in terms of allegation of price gouging recently, we may suspect that are they controlling the price? This is not actual case because they are part of a bigger system, bigger supply chain. Whatever the increased price we have seen in our productions, in our transportation and logistics, that will be flowing through our final price. So that's why there is no other way that supermarket can sell their products in a loss. So if there is increased price, supermarket will have to increase their price as well. So they are a bigger part of this entire supply chain system. What can people do when rising fuel prices start affecting the cost and availability of groceries and transport? I would suggest don't overreact through panic buying. It is not helpful. Second, if you can use public transport and avoid unnecessary travels, it will save on consumption of fuel. We can divert that savings to our emergency services, farmers, transport companies, garbage collectors, so that we can keep our operations running. Who is hit hardest by the rising fuel cost and why? In my opinion, everyone in Australia will get impacted because of the disruption. Out of those communities, I believe remote communities will be mostly impacted because it's difficult to supply fuels in our remote areas, and they heavily rely on private cars due to having lack of public transport. They also rely on agricultural activities, and because of those cumulative impacts, they will be mostly impacted by this disruption. Where is Australia's supply chain most vulnerable right now? In my opinion, the many branches of Australian supply chains are impacted. For example, food supply chain, emergency supply chain, and our construction supply chain. So they heavily rely on services of our transportation, which is mostly by trucks. And our 90% of our trucks rely on diesel. So if this fuel disruption or shortages hit hard them, it will end up having disruption in our transportation services of those supply chain. And it will end up having shortages, wastage, and higher prices for our products and services. How long will this rising fuel cost last? It is hard to predict that how long the disruption will be going on. We have seen over a month now the Strait of Hormuz is impacted, and potentially the second one through Red Sea is going to be impacted. So these impacts of shipping disruption depends on our geopolitical uncertainties. The impacts we have had, it will take from few months, even a year, to stabilize the operations of our shipping routes and stabilize the demand and supply system. The impacts could be long-lasting, and it could end up having more inflation and higher prices. Why can't we get oils from other suppliers? You should understand that our supply chain is a very complex system. It involves many parties. And also we have established system for our suppliers of crude oils and refined oils. So it is very difficult to change the structure. So it takes years to change it. For example, if you want to change your suppliers of crude oil or refined oil, you need to establish that infrastructure and establish the whole network. Even if we can source our crude oils immediately, we can't refine it here because we don't have enough capacities. So that's why the solution should be for the longer term. There is no immediate solution for this crisis. Is there a way to stop fuel prices impacting supply so much? Yes, there are ways in immediate term, short term to longer term. So in the short term, government can help reducing fuel excises. We can see that they reduce it already by 50% for 3 months. That is a release for a short term. On the other hand, we have seen few state governments, they provided rebate for public transport and making it free for general public. And that can also help reducing pressure on fuels we are using. So those measures are really useful for the short term, but in the long term, we need to build our refinery capacities here so that we can respond more effectively to those crises. Even if we can source our crude oils, immediately from other sources, we have refinery capacities here. As fuel supplies become more limited, could we see rationing in our communities, and who would get priority? In my opinion, we are not there in yet, but if this crisis continues for a longer time and there is a chronic shortage of fuel supplies, I believe that is a possibility. But if this happens, our emergency services, farmers and agricultural sectors and transportation should get the priority, and I hope we will not be there. That was all the questions for today. Until next time, stay curious.